I'm a sculptor from Dublin, and I have been in Florence for the last 10 years or so. I just handed out my card's just been handed out there. If whoever is interested in it can take a card, and if you know anybody who'd be interested, I have more cards here when we're finished that you can pass on. You can put it on your Facebook. You can recommend it to whoever you want, if you want. Essentially, what I'm going to do this afternoon, I don't know how much time I have, but normally I try and get the talk done as quick as possible, and then take questions and answers, because I think that's the most interesting part of the talk. So the first thing, what I usually do is as an artist, I work with images. So I'm just going to show you images, and I'll work with the image, and I'll explain what's going on through the images. Just a quick overview of where I'm coming from. I'm from Dublin, born in 1971, 2nd of April, so I'll be 40 next 2nd of April. And I went to art school in Dublin, the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. And there I was kicked out of the sculpture department because my art was too Christian and too figurative. So I went into the craft department and did silversmithing and goldsmithing. Can you hear me back there?
No.
No?
Put the louder mic on?
Sure, you can put on whatever you want. Santa costume? This one. Okay, so I've one wire in the back here. So I'll put on two. Okay. That goes on like this. How's that? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Did you hear anything I said earlier on? Well, take it from the top? It was difficult. I'll take it from the top. Right. I'm Dony MacManus. I'm a sculptor from Dublin, Ireland. And I born in 1971 and went to art school 20 years ago. And the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. I started in sculpture, but I was kicked out of the sculpture department because my art was too Christian and too figurative. Essentially, it meant something. That was the problem. And so the establishment couldn't deal with that, so they kicked me out of the department. So that's generally the head of the department was one of the 68th generation that tried to destroy, well, effectively destroyed the art department. And we see that a lot in a lot of universities. There's a kind of there was a movement to pretty much deconstruct Western culture, and this was another aspect of it. So the people who were busy effectively destructing Western culture in the universities and art schools in Europe, and I think it's the same here in the United States, they become the establishment, and then they become the new dictatorship of relativism. So that was my first introduction to that experience. So that was 20 years ago. So I decided the best thing to do was, I saw the writing on the wall. I knew I was going to get kicked out, so I decided to apply to the craft department, especially goldsmithing and silversmithing, because I was particularly interested in bronze casting. I see you have a lot of nice bronzes on campus here. Frederick Hart, very, very, very good sculptor. So I did that for a few years. I got my degree in that, a bachelor's degree in craft design. And then I taught for a number of years in inner city projects. Then I did a degree in art education. And then from that degree in education, I taught in high school for a number of years. And then I got a scholarship in 1999 to go to the New York Academy of Art. I studied figurative art there, and that helped me decode the masters, understand anatomy as a language, artistic language. Then after September 11, after I graduated, my visa had run out, I was illegal, and after September 11 it wasn't a good place to be illegal. So I left, went back to Italy, went back to Europe. I decided to go to Italy because that would be the ideal place to understand all this great work, to take the training from New York Academy and apply it to the great masters. And that way I was working directly from the great masters, so I could study Bernini, Michelangelo, with all the understanding of artistic anatomy. And it was like working with them in the same studio. So a number of compositions I did, and you'll see them here, I worked directly from these great masters in Rome. So I did that. I stayed in Rome for a year and a half, basically doing commissions for the United States. And then I went to Florence for a year and a half. And then I was asked to go back to Ireland to establish the Irish Academy of Figurative Art. I ran that and directed it. I founded it and directed it for 3.5 years. And then I realized that this wasn't going where I wanted to. It was very academic. It was all anatomy, drawing, sculpture, and painting. But there was no interest in penetrating the truth behind the great masters. So the students were only interested in technique. So I wanted to use the technique use the language to penetrate the thought from which the language comes from. So essentially all language, whether it's English, Italian, or art, they all come from thought. Okay? So in order to understand contemporary art, or to understand European art, you have to understand European thought. So it's Greco-Romano, Judeo-Christian culture. So I wanted to use the language of art to penetrate that thought from which the art came from. And in doing that, you really get a full revival of the culture. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, I'll illustrate it as best I can through the slides. So this first slide here is my studio, was my studio in San Marco, the Dominican convent in San Marco. The prior there gave me the use of Beato Angelico's studio for 2 years, which was a fantastic privilege. So that's how I did. This is on the card you got out. There's more cards here if you need them. This is St. Joseph and the Child Jesus, which I did for Florida in USA. This is my first commission I did. It's a Madonna and Child, Our Lady of Hope. And this was for a drug rehabilitation centre in West Tala, which is in Dublin. And it was for a drug. There's a syringe here at the feet, under the feet of the Virgin, and a bottle here. So it was like crushing the serpent, the contemporary serpent of drug and alcohol addiction. So it's using Christian iconography for contemporary crises. And on the bottom there's a chain which is broken in the center, so it's breaking the chain of addiction. So it was for basically drug and alcohol addicts to find hope in their faith. And that was commissioned by a communist politician who, I'm a member of Opus Dei. A friend of mine was a very good friend of his. He's also a member of Opus Dei. And he helped this communist politician to come to the faith. And through our friendship, he came to the faith and ended up as a member of Opus Dei. And this caused a lot of confusion in the Communist Party in Ireland. Especially when he started commissioning this type of artwork for inner city projects. So it just turned their whole agenda on its head. They felt that the poor are their property. No, that the poor is everybody's property. We all need to look after the poor. Everybody's responsibility, not property. So here, this is the second commission I got, which was for Dublin City Centre. This competition was run very well. Not that because I won it, but because it was very democratic. Basically, they shortlisted 4 artists, and they gave us enough money to do sketches, models, and then those models were exhibited, 3-dimensional models were exhibited, and then the public were invited into the gallery to vote for the artwork they wanted. So basically, I won the competition, and the person said I got 75% of the vote. So that gave me a great confidence to make a sculpture, knowing that it was wanted by the local people. So it's a very popular piece in Ireland. And that helped me realize that all the other compositions in the exhibition were abstract pieces, because they were all done by people who went to art school with me. and they were forced away from figuration and into abstraction because that was more contemporary and meant nothing. So, but I refuse to go that direction because I want to communicate something that means something to people. And the human body, I see, is crucial for communication in art, for communicating the human condition, essentially. So obviously we all have bodies. The only reason we know each other is through our bodies. So the body is the primary means of communication for a human being. And because the human being is the most important aspect of existence, our relationship with each other and so on, we need to understand the human body and be able to communicate through the human body. Now, an artist who hasn't got that capacity is impoverished in a major degree. And an artist who has that capacity to communicate through the body, and not only have the capacity to communicate, but actually penetrate the meaning of the body. And that's where I found theology of the body very, very helpful, where you can penetrate the meaning of the human body and express it through the human body. It's a tremendous gift to culture. And if there's to be a revival in Western culture, we need to get back to the Incarnation. Because the Incarnation is essentially the source of our culture. That's where St. Francis helped an awful lot in the development of Western culture. He inspired Giotto to bring bones and muscles into art and to create the vero presenza in art, the true presence. And that helps an awful lot to revive the culture. That inspired Dante as well and inspired the whole Renaissance. So the Incarnation is crucial. And John Paul II was a very great aid to bring that back in through theology of the body. Basically his way of explaining Humanae Vitae. This is St. Catherine of Siena and St. Josemaria Escrivá, founder of Opus Dei. These are the first two bronzes I was commissioned to do in New York for DC. These are in the Catholic Information Center in Washington, DC. I have 4 bronzes there, all commissioned by Father C.J. McCluskey, a priest of Opus Dei who's on EWTN. He has a number of programs on EWTN. These were commissioned while I was a student in the New York Academy. Essentially, I left Ireland with $3,000 in my pocket. I had to take out a loan of $22,000 just to survive in New York and study in New York for 1 semester. So I felt it was worth the gamble because this was the only chance I was going to get serious formation, because you can't get it anywhere else on a master's program. So I had to take that gamble, knowing that I would have to return in 6 months with a $22,000 debt. But I think it was worth it. I thought it was worth it because at least I had a direction in my formation and I could try and take it from there. But I was very lucky to have developed relationships with different architects. And one architect in particular was very interested in my work. And when I returned for Christmas, I thought I was never going to see the United States again and get any more training. And he rang me just after Christmas to say, do you want to do this commission to do these sculptures? So I said yes, and I gave a price and they took it, and that helped me to pay my debts and to continue studying in New York. And he asked me to do those 2 last sculptures in 3 months, which was a real rush job. So I don't like them that much. They're very stiff, to be perfectly honest. So I said to him, when he had commissioned me to do this St. Joseph and the Child Jesus, I said to him, look, the best thing you can do is, look, I'm going to charge the same amount of money, but you're going to get a much better sculpture if you give me more time, because I need to contemplate the figure I'm doing and to pray about it and to develop the drawing and the sculpture in time and live with the sculpture. And so it took a few more months to do this one. But I think this is more successful because here we have a St. Joseph that is more I can connect with. This is a St. Joseph that I'm inspired to create. A lot of the inspiration comes from the writings of St. Escrivá, who talks, the founder of Opus Dei, he talks about St. Joseph as a young man, a virile man, and compassionate, and not the old guy you see in the paintings, the traditional paintings, which were done to make it look more likely that Joseph was celibate, or to make the Virgin look younger, for good reasons. But I think it does a tremendous injustice to St. Joseph. And it also doesn't help young men to realize that they can be virile and celibate, or dedicate themselves to God. So I think also it helps for young men to understand fatherhood. And one major crisis I saw in my own experience working with inner city kids in Dublin, especially when I was working on programs, Opus Dei programs in the Bronx in New York, that there was a real crisis of fatherhood that I wanted to address. And I thought that my primary language is sculpture. It's not English or Italian, it's sculpture. So I wanted to communicate that through my through form. So I decided to do this image. It's also, St. Escriva talks about it's the divine filiation. That's the fundamental, that's the core idea behind Opus Dei. So it's divine filiation and throwing ourselves into the strong arms of our Father, in St. Escriva's words. So I wanted to get across that aspect of divine filiation as well. Full, complete trust in God. Oh yeah, before I go on, says Father C.J. McCluskey, when he blessed this sculpture at a big mass, he said in the homily, "I asked Dony to give me St. Joseph the worker, but..." I don't know, what's he going to say? I said, he gave me St. Joseph the biker. And everybody laughed, and I was quite embarrassed. But he said, that's exactly what we need. We need a St. Joseph that speaks to a new generation. It's a kind of it's almost like a rock and roll St. Joseph, kind of like a Bono St. Joseph. But it speaks to a new generation. And I think it's important to communicate values, contemporary values that are also Christian, and help Christian values and contemporary values to link, so as to build bridges rather than close doors. So in that way, it's a kind of a dialogue. And this comes not from forcing yourself to be contemporary. One of the big problems with artists today is that they're trying so hard to be new and to be relevant. But really, essentially, I consider myself a contemporary artist. I'm an artist, and I'm contemporary. What more evidence do you need? So it's just the fact that I'm Christian. They would say I'm not contemporary because I use full old-fashioned ideas. But there's nothing old-fashioned about humanity. And Christianity, the church essentially is the expert in humanity. And humanity is not old-fashioned. We're all human. And we always will be human. So the church will always be relevant. And its message will always be relevant. So, essentially what's happening here naturally is an iconography, a contemporary Christian iconography is gradually emerging. And what we need today is an iconography, contemporary iconography, Christian iconography for the new millennium. And that's something I'm trying to work on, and that's what I want to encourage other artists to do likewise. Because I don't see myself as a Michelangelo. I see myself more like a Ghirlandaio. From whom studio Michelangelo came from. Okay, Ghirlandaio was a good artist, but he wasn't a great artist. I don't consider myself a great artist, but I do know that if I can create an environment with the right theological, philosophical training, the right artistic training, the right encouragement, the right devotional encouragement, then I think we can create a situation where great artists can be encouraged, and you'll see later on some of the fruits of that. This is a bust of Hobie Baker done for Princeton University. This was commissioned by Charles Scribner III. I got into a lot of trouble with the pronunciation, with my Irish pronunciation of that word. We say TH, or TH sounds a bit strange. But Charles Scribner III is a publisher from New York City, and we just met accidentally through. When I was in New York, I used to go to Pat's for Mass, and every day, and so did he. And I just, after 4 months of shaking his hands, I just introduced myself because it felt very strange. So we don't know each other after 4 months. He told me who he was. I didn't know who he was, and he told me that he wrote books on Bernini. I said, oh, fantastic, one of my favorite. And then we got to know each other. And the reason I tell you is because he was telling me his story. He came to the faith. He was Episcopalian, but he came to the faith through his study of Bernini and Rubens in Rome. He wrote books on both of them. So that's one thing to realize, that the art history has a tremendous power of bringing people to the faith, as well as artistic language and training. This is a statue of Saint Josemaria Escrivá in the headquarters of Opus Dei in Manhattan, the headquarters of Opus Dei in the United States in Manhattan. And this was commissioned just after I left, after September 11, and I did this in Rome. And I basically researched this sculpture in by drawing from original Bernini sculpture. There's a Bernini sculpture that has a similar composition to this, and I was drawing from that, and then I would bring those drawings back to my studio and I would compose it. And this was a fantastic opportunity. It was like working in Bernini's studio. It's the nearest you could possibly get to it. So this was a great experience. And I'm showing you this just to give you an idea of what can be learnt in Rome, for instance. Here I was asked to make a life-size sculpture of St. Escrivá in a chapel pretty much the size of from here to the second row here. This sculpture is in that row there, that wall there, and then the tabernacle is here. And I wanted to respect the hierarchy of the chapel, and so did the people who commissioned me, so that the tabernacle will be number 1, the altarpiece will be number 2, and then the devotional piece will be the third item. So as to respect that, and to keep him life-size, I set him into the wall, and then I darkened him so that he would sink into the wall, and then he would gesture towards the tabernacle, so that when you look at him, you don't land on him and pray to him, but you pray through him to the Blessed Sacrament. So he's guiding you towards the Blessed Sacrament. And that helped to resolve 2 problems. Having a substantial sculpture dedicated to the saint, but at the same time, that would reinforce orientation towards the Blessed Sacrament. So it's completely liturgically centered. And this is one thing I'm very keen on. One central aspect of the way I work is that all my work is in service of the church. One thing I've learned from St. Escrivá is that we are to serve the church as the church wants to be served, not as we want to serve. So what I do is, all we have to do is look at the encyclicals of the Holy Father. If we want to know what the Pope wants us to think about and do, we just look to his encyclicals. They're the right up-to-date reports of what he wants us to do. So the main idea behind John Paul II was the theology of the body, so I concentrated on that. And that was fantastic and served tremendously in my artistic development and also in the apostolate. Many people, friends of mine, came back to the faith, homosexuals sorting out their lives and coming back to the faith. It was a tremendous tool, apostolic tool. So Pope Benedict has another focus. Not that theology of the body is irrelevant anymore, it's still phenomenally relevant, but Pope Benedict's focus is really liturgy and orientation towards the Lord. In particular, the book Spirit of the Liturgy. And one thing we can see about contemporary culture, there's a lot of development in technology and science. There's a lot of knowledge about how things happen, but not why things happen. So with orientation, with the liturgy, we're given direction for all this energy. So there's a world full of energy, full of potential, but there's very little direction and there's very little leadership. And the Holy Father sees the liturgy as the primary means of orientation towards the Lord. So basically the liturgy guides us towards the Lord. Okay? So essentially the way I look at it is it's a basic analogy, but especially young people have tremendous potential, tremendous power. And I see it's kind of like the explosive power of a grenade. Or it's the explosive power of a bullet. A grenade explodes and makes a mess, okay? But a bullet, when it explodes, especially in a barrel of a rifle, it makes a huge distance. And if you want to achieve something in life, if you want something to happen with your life, that direction is very important. And that consists in professional direction and also spiritual direction. Spiritual direction is fundamental. So that's an aspect that I think is very important. And that's what I think the Holy Father is trying to do with the liturgy, is help us have direction so that we can put all our energies and bring it towards the Lord and bring our culture back to Christ. This is Cardinal Newman, who was made Beato recently. And this was commissioned by Father CJ 8 years ago, so he had he saw it coming down the tracks. He was the Father C.J. McCluskey was a Newman scholar, so he would have a particular devotion to Newman. This is an abstract piece. It's probably the only abstract piece I have here. Now this was commissioned. I always try and work from the figure, and in secular environment, it's very difficult to get figurative work out there. So when I was back in Ireland, I was applying for all sorts of commissions. And one commission actually slipped under my bed. I forgot it, and I realized that there was only a few hours to actually fill in the drawing and the documents and send it off. So I did a very quick sketch, this abstract piece. And of course, it's the only one that won. Precisely because it means nothing. So I won the competition, and I got the job. And this is basically a 4 meter by 2 meter lump of nothing. That just means nothing. But it was said, well, it was hopefully it was going to be prettier than it ended up. But what happened there was essentially my art school was launched at the same time as I won this commission. So I used the best foundry in Ireland to enlarge it because I was working on the project. I had 50 students within 2 weeks essentially. When I returned to Ireland, I put up 3 posters in 3 different art shops. And within 2 weeks, there was 50 students signed up because they were starved of artistic training. Because the art school that kicked me out is so busy deconstructing our culture that when artists realized that there was a real possibility of learning something, they signed up. So there was 50 students. So that left me with a huge responsibility because I am not an administrator. So I'm an artist, so I just panic stations. 50 students, what the hell do I do? So it was very difficult to do this commission at the same time. So I put in the safe hands, I thought, of the best foundry, because foundries do enlargement as well. And unfortunately, this enlargement didn't work out as best as it should have. But anyway, it's there. But anyway, it also helped me to continue the project with the money for it. This is a St. Joseph and the Child Jesus in Florida. This is the one on your card. This was commissioned by a lady who really liked the one in DC, and she wanted me to do another one with the Joseph kissing the child. So I thought that was a beautiful idea, so I went ahead and did that. And speaking of heads, she asked me to change this head 5 times, which set it back in about 6 months. And then on the 5th head, I just got fed up with changing models. So I just resorted to the first head, and she said, "Yes, that's the one I want." So I just kept quiet and just took the money and went on. But this is what happens at times. This is a Pope Benedict for St. Patrick's Cathedral. This was commissioned by Charles Scrivener III again, and that was to commemorate the visit of Pope Benedict to the United States 3 years ago. Now this here looks a bit odd, but it's a basic explanation of anatomical logic. Okay. Now anatomical logic is the basic theory which I use to teach the language of a figurative art language. Now, essentially here in the green, you have extension, okay? And that's the body going like that. Flexion is going like this. Lateral bending is like this, okay? And rotation is twisting like this. Now, as you know, those artists that are here, you'll see that the extension and flexion are complementary actions done in complementary colors, okay? Green and red. And lateral bending is done in complementary colors as well. So that helps understand the logic of what's going on. Because anatomy is quite intimidating. There's a whole lot of Latin words that just make it can be very intimidating from the start. But actually, once you start understanding a bit of Latin, you realize that these Latin names tell you exactly what these muscles and bones do. So this is a kind of an introduction to the logic. And I'll go through a lot of images here, which will give you an understanding of how that applies to the body. So you'll see images here front. This the rectus abdominis, the muscle that pulls the body, it's stomach muscles, the six-pack, or what you call. And this is from the side. And these are cross sections of the musculature in different parts of the body. Okay. So I'll fly through these images, and you'll see, just to give you a quick view of what needs to be learned. So there's extensors. Just to get an idea of how this is how an artist understands the body. Okay, he understands to understand a muscle. You need to understand its origin and insertion. And it's so, for instance, you understand its origin, insertion, and its shape. Then you understand its function. Okay, so form follows function. So if you have you understand a form if you understand the function, essentially. And these are cross sections here, so it gives you an idea. But obviously I go into much more detail normally. But you're not all artists here, so I'll just keep going. So that's the basic logic, and I use that logic to penetrate it. That logic becomes a vocabulary which is used to express a poetry. Okay, so all poetry is based in a vocabulary of some sort. So Dante used Italian, Shakespeare used English, Michelangelo used form. Okay, and Bernini used form. So here's an example of Rubens, the painter, using form to express his poetry. So he used that language we saw earlier on to create these poetic images. All right. So the more you have a command of the vocabulary, the more license you have to abstract from that vocabulary to create poetry. So, for instance, Rubens is Bernini and Michelangelo. They are profoundly abstract artists. Abstraction is fundamental to art. Shakespeare was an abstract artist. Dante abstracted as well. All great art is abstracted because what they do is they take a vocabulary and they make it mean something much more. Okay. So there you have Raphael doing the same. More Raphael, Pontormo. These are just poetic images. This is somebody who has a command of a language that just brings it somewhere else. Tiepolo. And this, I just go over to how this is done through drawing. Basically, you get a big sheet of paper, you get your friend Gerald to pose in this corner, and you just draw him away there. Build the drawing, and then you do it in 3 dimensions as well. So you build a skeleton, and you do a millimeter accuracy of all the origin, the tuberosities on the bone, so everything is perfectly accurate. And then you apply every muscle from origin to insertion. Now this might seem really tedious for somebody who's not interested in art, but if you're interested in art and communicating through the body, this is fascinating, because there is nothing more beautiful than the human body. If there is, then there's something wrong with you, because we're designed to love the human body. And these are some of my students working away on the human body. This guy here in the green, this is Osamu, a Japanese student. Now he's kind of interesting guy. He's a very interesting guy, actually. He came to Italy to learn restoration and restore Christian art. And he discovered my studio. He learned art through me, and then he realized that the incarnation was behind all this great art. And through that, he discovered the faith, and he started catechesis, and was baptized 2 years ago by the Archbishop in the Duomo, last year. And it just shows you the power of art to bring people to the faith. This is a guy who comes from a completely different culture. And within 1 year, he's completely, he converts. And he's very passionate about his faith. And now he's studying art as an artist. And he wants to communicate the Christian faith to his people back in Japan. Only 1% of Japan is Catholic. And he wants to go, he's already proposed to the Archbishop of Nagasaki, the most Catholic part of Japan, to do a crucifix for Nagasaki. But a crucifix which is profoundly Catholic and profoundly Japanese, so as to bring and reinforce the faith there. So it's really powerful, what we're talking about. So if we can create a school in Rome, maybe it's probably the most likely place to have it, and bring people from all these different cultures, there's a phenomenal power to that. One thing I proposed, I met the Holy Father. I met the Holy Father 4 years ago. He gave me rosary beads on a Monday. The next day, I met his personal secretary in the Vatican Gardens, and I explained this whole project to him. And one of the things I explained to him was that I was trying to encourage a Vatican Academy of Art. There's a Vatican Academy of everything except art. So it's one of those crazy things in the world. Because the Vatican is famous, obviously most famous for the church, but secondly, it's most famous for art. And there is no Vatican Academy of Art. So it's a real no-brainer. Something has to be done there. So what I basically suggested to Georg was that we should really introduce a Vatican Academy of Art. And part of that, he was really excited about it. We talked for this for about 15 minutes. And he was asking me lots of questions. And one of the things I was explaining to him was that if we managed to get some sort of scholarship, maybe a diocesan scholarship, where maybe like I've seen it in my travels, so many different dioceses, where there's artists who want to serve the church but don't have the training. So, for instance, if the Archbishop of Rio de Janeiro had a number of artists in his diocese that wanted to serve the church, but had talent but didn't have training, philosophical, theological, liturgical, artistic, but was willing to learn, they could get a scholarship for maybe a 4-year degree or 2-year master's and send them to Rome, study, and then pay back with the 4-year or 2-year projects serving the diocese. There is like a complete win-win situation where you get the best training possible in Rome, where you get the best theologians, the best artists, you get the best history of art, you get the best monuments to study from, and then you're bringing that concentrated culture, Catholic culture, back to the regional areas and transforming the faith and culture of that area. And not only the churches, but also that will penetrate the galleries and the rest of culture. So the way I see it is that, as I told you, I started an art school in Dublin. I did that to teach academic art so that the techniques would be taught, and then people would create beautiful images. And through that beauty, they would come to the truth. But very few people were willing to make that final move. So I decided to return to Italy and concentrate on a sacred school of art. And the idea was essentially to use, I came to the conclusion also through the Florence Friday Forum, which I ran from my studio for 4 years in Florence. And that was basically getting 4 or 5 artists each Friday to come, show their work, and critique each other. These are academic artists, contemporary artists, you name it, all coming together. And Florence got the greatest concentration of artists in the world. So you're getting the best of the best there and critiquing each other. And by doing that, we would come to the conclusion. The conclusion was that there are 2 major crises in contemporary art. One is the art school crisis. The other is the academy crisis. The art school crisis is that they don't teach sculpting, drawing, painting, anatomy anymore. So the artists are coming out of the school with no vocabulary, completely frustrated, cannot communicate, and do not have the language they need to penetrate the culture they need to hand on. And that's been the agenda in most universities and art schools for the last 40 years, to actively deconstruct, which is literally destruct, Western culture, so that students would not have access to our heritage. And that's a complete denial. To me, that's a crime, and that needs to be addressed. And I think schools like this are addressing it, and I want to address it in the arts. So essentially, the conclusion I came to through that forum, I had a fair idea of it before, but I wanted to reaffirm it with the best artists from all over the world, so that they can see it. They can see the crisis as well. So the major crisis was the art school, they don't get training. In the academies, they get the training. They learn sculpt, draw, paint, do anatomy very well, but unfortunately, they don't use that language to penetrate the thought from which that language comes from. Why? Because when you penetrate the thought from which that language comes from, what do you discover? Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian culture. Right? Now, some people can deal with the Greco-Roman part, but the Judeo-Christian is really challenging, because when you discover that Christ is the source of this beauty, the culmination of that culture, that challenges you to transform your life, because Christ doesn't sit on the fence. He challenges us to sanctity, and that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's where people don't want to go. And I think the necessity is to challenge people to go there, because unless we go there, we will not have true transformation of our culture. So, and I can see this happening in my studio on a daily basis. Osamu was just one example of that. This guy here. These are more students working away. Now, these students here are students that come from those other academies, the very secular academies, and they didn't have the courage to go further, whereas Osam did. He didn't have the baggage that they had as Europeans and as Americans. These are mainly European and American students. Osamu, because he came fresh, he didn't have any preconceptions or prejudices. He came straight through and understood it like that. Whereas those with the prejudice blocked it off, because they knew that if they went further, they would discover Christ. It's interesting. So this is how the drawings develop. And then using the drawings and the anatomical structures. And this is where you take that knowledge and you use it to study the great masters. So I call this basically dissecting the masters. So the first part is really anatomical logic and the poetry of form. Here we're using the anatomical logic and the poetry of the form to penetrate and understand and dissect the masters, so as to understand how the great masters became who they were. So here you have a Pontormo drawing, and here you have the drawings I did earlier on with transparencies of the musculature superimposed onto the drawing of the skeleton. Okay? So that you have a profound understanding of what's going on. And here you have a transparent paper here, which is put on top of the original drawing, and then I use my friend Gerald again to pull out the skeleton. Okay? So it's an artistic X-ray. And then once the X-ray is done, then you put on the musculature, so as to understand the origin and insertion of each muscle and the action, and then you color code the action. And then you put on the drapery. So you can only, if you're an artist, you can only draw me up here if you understand my bone structure, my muscle structure, and the drapery, my clothes. So in order to understand the way I'm dressed, the way the folds work, you have to understand everything that's going on underneath. Right? And that might sound daunting, but it's tremendously liberating. Just as it might sound daunting to study English grammar, but once you understand it, you're liberated to express yourself and also penetrate great depths of our dignity as human beings and our tradition as people through the great writers of the past. So that's the anatomical logic. And this is how an artist sees, okay? They see the bone structure, they see the muscle structure, and they see the drapery. This is how Bernini would have seen. This is how Caravaggio would have seen. This is how all the great masters would have seen. And this is how we need to be able to see today to create great art. This is another figure. It's a resurrection figure. Bone structure on one side, muscle structure on the other. This is a crucifixion I did in New York. It's an anatomical study of a crucifixion. So it's not a what would you say, a devotional piece. It's more me studying, delving, trying to contemplate Corpus Christi, essentially. But the body of Christ in the language I'm most familiar with, okay, which is form. So it's penetrating the meaning of Corpus Christi, the body of Christ in bones and muscles. And so it's to challenge my faith and to penetrate it in the depth I can. Because I'm responsible to, that's my responsibility, is to really understand it in my language so as to communicate it with the most conviction possible through that language. Because if I can't understand it in my true language, which is form, how can I communicate it? So I have to challenge myself to that. So that's what I'm doing here. This piece here is basically inspired by Humanae Vitae and Theology of the Body, which is an explanation of Humanae Vitae. Humanae Vitae means on human life. All right? It doesn't mean don't wear a condom. It means on human life. Okay? People like to limit it to that, but it means it's about what it means to be a human being. So what I wanted to do here was to create an image which communicated the beauty of that message and also the meaning of human sexuality. So essentially at the top here, there's a child. You can't really see it here, but there's a newborn child. And underneath here you have this male and female form, which are spiraling like a double helix. And this is an anatomical study. So you see this is all anatomically detailed here. So it's an anatomical study. It's only about this size, as a proposal for a life-size bronze, which I like to do as a kind of a fountain of life in bronze, so that the water would come out of the top here and pour down through the limbs. And the idea is that at the flesh would be beautiful and youthful at the top, and as you go gradually down, it becomes more decayed and rotting, in rotting flesh at the very bottom here. The concept is that sexuality is a tremendous gift, which is which brings with it tremendous responsibility. So it's kind of sourced in Love and Responsibility by John Paul Carwartia. So that with sexuality, it demands tremendous respect, so as to live it properly. Because if you live it properly, it gives life and love at the top. Or if it's not respected, it results in violence and death and decay at the bottom. So an icon like this would be a very powerful symbol of a movement. The whole idea was to kind of have an icon for the culture of life, all in one form that will communicate that concept. So hopefully someday it will be commissioned. But that day we'll have to, whenever that will be, I don't know. This here is just a life drawing. It's just to give you an idea of how that affects your life drawing. Here we have a bozzetto, which is a small sketch. And this is for an altarpiece in Rome. I was commissioned to do this altar for a university chapel in Rome. So it's basically 14 foot by 10 foot bronze panel. So it's all in relief. And it's a Pentecost figure. So you have the Holy Spirit coming down on the Virgin here and the apostles and the holy women. And under here you have God the Father holding the Syndone, which is the Shroud of Turin. And that's the tabernacle. The tabernacle door is there. And underneath here you have Cosmos. which is a figure from the Orthodox tradition, Eastern Orthodox tradition, which is a figure which is always in their icons of this figure who's in darkness, and with Pentecost comes the light of revelation onto the world. So what I want to do here was to bring Eastern and Western traditions together. So an Eastern concept into a Western style figurative composition. And as you see here, these are all on one level here. These are all one panel. And the darkness back here, that's set back. And this is full in the round sculpture here. This part is in relief, but this is in the round, so it's coming out. And to this area here. So this is all set back. So there's a light behind the Holy Spirit, which comes down onto these figures here and penetrates the wings here. And the light comes to the forehead of Cosmos. So it's the light of the Holy Spirit, the revelation and birth of the church, revealing the truth of Christ to the world. That's the concept. So that's how I develop my theology, is communicated through form. So that's what's going on here. Now, I would develop this concept, this language. First of all, I'd start off with El Greco. One thing that a lot of artists are nervous about is, how am I going to be original? I have to do something completely original. I say, don't bother about that. You concentrate on the great masters. And look at which masters speak to you the most. Is it El Greco? Is it Bernini? Is it Rubens? Is it whoever? And find the artists that you identify with the best and work with them, study them, make them yours. So for instance, with this commission, I took El Greco's, almost directly from El Greco's Pentecost, with no shame. I took it straight out because I knew it was going to develop. I knew it was going to develop because of my love of other artists coming in as the process develops. And also I knew it was going to develop because the people who are commissioning me would have their own ideas. So I knew that from experience. So there'd be theological ideas that might clash, and then I'd have to conform it to the liturgy. So there's plenty of development to be done. As you'll see here, for instance, I was asked to change the tabernacle. So here I have God the Father holding Christ like a pietà, and the figure of Christ spirals like an S shape into this form down here, which ends up as a tabernacle. The idea behind this composition was to make the Christ figure the only figure in full 3 dimensions. So that would emphasize the vero presenza, the true presence of Christ. And remember, this is for a university chapel. I want to communicate in a very direct way. So this is really, I see myself kind of like a neo-Baroque artist, because we're in a very counter-reformational time. So we're going to have to need art that's really gets the message across in a very clear way. So with this is for a university chapel. About 10-15% of the students will be practicing. So very different scene to what you got here. So I need something that really emotionally stirs these students to engage in the faith. That's my responsibility. So that's what I was trying to do here. And for them to understand the true presence of the Eucharist, that's a real challenge. So I was trying to do that in sculptural form by making Christ 3-dimensional and the rest of the figures in relief. So it's to emphasize that. And then I was asked to change that so as not to have the Trinity and Pentecost together, 2 very strong ideas together, because that would be confusing. So I had to step back and change the composition in service of the church, in service of the message. It's not about me. This is not the altarpiece of Dony MacManus. This is Pentecost. This is in service of the church and bringing souls closer to Christ. End of story. That's what it's all about. It's all about service. So I was told to bring the Madonna in the center. And one idea I had was for the Madonna to reveal the tabernacle, because she was the original tabernacle. And so I composed it in that way. But again, they felt it was a little bit too direct, too carnal. So I was asked to set the Madonna back behind the tabernacle and the tabernacle more forward. So it would be more subtle idea to get across. Here you'll notice that the there's a drawing here, because the original sculpture, I had to stop it halfway through, because it was on this panel here. This was in Beato Angelico's studio, the studio saw earlier on. So this is Chris Ailes. He's a student from Portland, Oregon, and he was helping me out on this. So he helped me put this all up, and then this clay was put onto this panel here. Here you can see it all here. This was all developed. This was all composed in clay and relief, and then I was asked to change studio. Well, I was asked to. There was a new prior moved into the San Marco, and I had to leave because he didn't want me to be there. So unfortunately, I had to leave halfway through the project. So I had to make a mold of this and get it to the foundry, and then move studio somewhere else, and then do the tabernacle. That's why you saw the tabernacle with a drawing, so as I could compose the tabernacle in the context of the full composition. That make sense? Okay. So this is how the tabernacle ended up. So you had the Madonna behind the tabernacle. She's calling down the Holy Spirit, who's in front here, calling the Holy Spirit down onto the church. And you see the church is the Duomo of St. Peter. The Dome of St. Peter on top of the Holy of Holies of the Old Testament. So it's a Judeo-Christian tradition. I wanted to get that across very clearly. And also I wanted to communicate the tabernacle, the true presence, through architectonic language. So it gives a real permanence. So it's very different to having the Christ figure, so it's a different tack. But I thought this would be better, more successful, because the rest of the composition is very Baroque. There's a lot of movement. So with this, I decided to make the tabernacle very solid and architectonic, so there's a sense of permanence, and the permanent aspect of Christ being with us till the end of time. There's angels in adoration there. This is the baptism of Cody Swanson. Does this give you an idea of the apostolic potential of artistic understanding of the great masters? This is Cody, a self-confessed punk kid from Hawaii. When he was 18, he went to Florence to study art. He is a very talented sculptor. He ended up teaching sculpture in the Florence Academy of Art. And through our friendship, he started to discover the faith and converted. He asked if he could be converted and be baptized about 2.5 years ago. He was baptized 2 years ago with his wife. They married a few months beforehand in a registry office. And they were baptized by the Archbishop in the Duomo in Florence on Easter Saturday night. Beautiful ceremony. It was the Archbishop's first Easter. And they had their first Holy Communion, first confession, first baptism, and confirmation, and they renewed their wedding vows, all in one night. So it was a very beautiful occasion, and the Archbishop brought them through the whole church afterwards to show the congregation that this is the way forward. This is the new springtime. So the Archbishop was very, very happy with this. He thanked me after for helping him have the nicest Easter of his life, because he was new. This is his new family, and he saw these as his new spiritual children, which is really beautiful occasion. And Cody's father was present at this baptism. This is Alina, his wife, being baptized. And this is Cody and Alina the year after, in the Easter Saturday night again, having their first child being baptized. And this is Osamu here, the guy you saw earlier on in the green jumper. He's now in a white suit being baptized. And he was baptized with Cody's father here. Okay. Now Cody's father is a very, very interesting guy. He was a real hardcore anti-Catholic. He said to Cody a year before he was baptized, he said, if you become a Catholic, I'll do something unpleasant to you, that you won't have children. And that was kind of a serious threat. So when he decided to join our catechesis, I got a little bit nervous. I just put away all the scissors. He basically he took part in the catechesis, and he within a few weeks he was really getting interested. but he was trying to stir things up. But when he saw the baptism of his son, Annalena, in the Duomo with the Archbishop, and the beautiful family that the church was, all his preconceptions of Catholicism went right down the tubes. And he asked after that if he could do catechesis with me and to join Osamu, this Japanese guy. So Osamu and Dewey did catechesis together and were baptized together with Cody's daughter. That's quite poetic. Cody's father with his granddaughter baptized together. And if he went along with his previous plans, there would be no granddaughter. So it's a kind of an interesting poetic aspect. And this guy here is also another guy who came back to the faith through the studio as well. And he ended up being the godfather of Dewey. So it just shows you the power of art to communicate the faith. That's why I illustrate this. So there is a human aspect to this as well. This is an example of Cody's art. This is a crucifix by Cody. It's about this size. It's just knockout. I mean, this guy is powerful. You're looking looking at a new Bernini, you know. And he was commissioned only a few months after he was baptized to do the sculpture, 16 life-size bronzes and marbles for Sioux Falls Cathedral, for Duncan Stroik, the architect. And this guy he's still wet from the baptism. And he's got this huge commission. So it just gives you an idea of a new springtime. I mean, there's talent out there. There are people out there who are starving for the faith and starving for the artistic formation. And there is a new springtime, and it's not far around the corner. All we have to do is get serious leadership in the arts in order to resurrect the arts and bring it back to the church. That's the main idea of the school. Here is an example of Cody and Osamu helping these guys here, Messers, Italian boys in Florence. This is a group we put together called Piccolo Michelangelo. I was inspired to do this because one day I was walking through Florence and I caught a bunch of about 40 kids around this sculpture, one of them with a spray can, and he was spraying the sculpture with this spray can. I just went ballistic. I just went completely nuts. I just ran over, grabbed the can off him, and spoke in my strongest Italian I could think of, saying, "What the hell are you doing? You're destroying your heritage. Do you realize how beautiful this is? It takes a foreigner like me to tell you this. It's ridiculous." So I walked off with the spray can in my hand, praying to my guardian angel that these guys wouldn't beat me up. But luckily they didn't. They must have been just in shock of who the hell this guy was, you know. But that inspired me to do something about the youth in Italy, so that these guys, like Florence is full of really good art schools that teach the technique but not the faith, unfortunately. But they're all American or Canadian or English, but they're not Italian, and and very few Italians realize that there's a crisis, unfortunately. And so there's a necessity to help these young Italians realize that their heritage has tremendous beauty and tremendous power, and they need it. They need to resurrect it. And so in order to do something positive, I set up this group, and I have a Hawaiian and a Japanese guy teaching these Italian boys how to sculpt like Michelangelo. It's kind of ironic, but it's beautiful, because Michelangelo started at this age, 12 years of age. And this is Cody and Lena and their child. I knew they would know. So here is, last week I was with the Archbishop Dolan, and he just blessed my sculpture of Pope Benedict. So that's what's going on here. And this is my meeting with the Holy Father. He gave me the rosary beads there. And then the next day, I gave him my card. So that's all, basically. So any questions, work away.